To have the pleasure of introducing to you our keynote speaker, Professor Lewis Gordon. I must admit, in leading up to this event, I got increasingly nervous trying to figure out just exactly what to say to do justice to introducing such an important scholar. How much is enough to capture the accomplishments without veering off into the commonly visited territory of introductions that are so long the audience is left wondering, why are you still speaking and why aren't we listening to the person that you're introducing? But as I thought about it, one of the things I really wanted to do with this moment is to celebrate Professor Gordon's accomplishments, precisely because they have paved the way for us to have the privilege of sitting here today. Lewis Gordon is Professor of Philosophy with affiliations in Asian and Asian American Studies, Caribbean and Latino Studies, and Judaic Studies at the University of Connecticut. European Union Visiting Chair and in Philosophy at Université de Toulouse in France, writer in residence at Birkbeck School of Law here in London, visiting Professor of Philosophy at the University of West Indies in Mona, Jamaica, honorary professor at the Unit of the Humanities at Rhodes University in South Africa, where he was also most recently Nelson Mandela Visiting Professor of Political and International Studies. He is also chairman of the Anna Julia Cooper, Frantz Fanon, Nicholas Guilin, and Claudia Jones Awards Committee of the Caribbean Philosophical Association. A graduate of Yale University and the Lehman Scholars Program of the City University of New York, his publications include the influential monographs Bad Faith and Anti-Black Racism, Fanon and the Crisis of the European Man, Her Majesty's Other Children, which won the Gustav Meyer Award for Human Rights in North America, Existentia Africana, Disciplinary Decadence, and An Introduction to Africana Philosophy, and with Jane Anna Gordon of Divine Warning, Reading Disaster in the Modern Age. He's also editor of the anthologies Fanon, A Critical Reader, Existence in Black, A Companion to African American Studies, which was the Net Library Book of the Month in February 2007, and Not Only the Master's Tool. Add to that a few hundred academic journals, articles, book chapters and reviews, many of which have been translated into several languages, and interviews and essays for a wide variety of public forums, including truthout.org, on which he now serves on the board of directors. His most recent books are What Fanon Said, A Philosophical Introduction to His Life and Thought, which has already been translated into Swedish and with Portuguese and Mandarin forthcoming, and he is co-editor of Journeys in Caribbean Thought, the Paget Henry Reader, who we've obviously heard so wonderfully from today. Dr. Gordon's work is also the subject of articles, essays, dissertations, anthologies, and monographs across the globe. He co-edits the book series Global Critical Caribbean Thought. And if that wasn't enough to make you breathless, Dr. Gordon is also a musician. He plays drums among many other instruments. Right, well, impressive as that is, invariably what stands out to me is Dr. Gordon's courage, humility, and candor. It is perhaps cliche to say, but we live in a turbulent time. A time of destruction, but also a time of possibilities. A time when students in particular are once again becoming the leading agents of social change. You are the Sankofa, for those who asked the question. You are the Sankofa. A time when a shining example of radical integrity in academia and beyond is not just welcomed, but an absolute necessity. And so we want to offer our heartfelt gratitude to Professor Gordon for coming today, requiring nothing other from us than our presence here. We thank you, and indeed Dr. Henry, who we're deeply honoured to have with us also, who's going to say a few words by way of introduction as well, and also our own Dr. Beckford, who spoke earlier. For it is these pioneering scholars' courage and excellence that have broken down barriers in the academy, such that I, a black female philosopher, can be standing here in front of you delivering this introduction. Because of scholars like Professor Gordon, our students here at Woolwich will never know what it is to need to fight to decolonize their curriculum. It's already decolonized, because we now have the power to make it so. Because of Professor Gordon and scholars like him, we have no reason to be satisfied with regurgitating a canon if that canon does not include the perspectives of those rendered other. We can simply turn to his extensive body of work Dr. Henry extensive, and so on and so forth of speakers we've had here today, and be the change that we seek. Here, I also want to note Professor Gordon's approach to gender and his inclusivity more generally. The significance of having an internationally renowned male scholar whose example does not reify or reinforce patriarchy, but rather recognizes intersectional challenges is immeasurable and refreshing. So thank you for that. Dr. Gordon, you show us that brilliance can occur when we speak with our own voice about the issues and themes that matter to us in ways that anyone can access if they are willing to hear. And for that we thank you. And so before we become joyful beneficiaries of your wisdom, I'd like to turn over to Dr. Professor Patrick Henry, please, to complete our introduction. Thank you very much.
Well, I told you I would get back at Lewis, right? All right. But no, seriously, Gabby, that was a wonderful, wonderful introduction of Professor Lewis. So basically what I would do is just add a little bit of story about how I got to really know Professor Lewis. In 1992, I became the chair of Africana Studies at Brown. Now, when you become the chair of a new department, you always think, well, what can I do to make the department better? What is going to be my distinct contribution to Africana Studies at Brown? And I looked around and I saw that nowhere on the Brown University campus was African, Afro-Caribbean, or African-American philosophy being taught. So I got this grand idea that it should be taught, right? And so I immediately spoke to the president and I said, I'm the new chair, I want to do something different. So I want to add to the riches of Brown. I want to introduce, African, Afro-Caribbean, African-American philosophy. President Gregorian, he was from Iran. And I think precisely because he was from Iran, and being Iranian at that time was not an easy identity to carry, right? So he immediately jumped at the idea and approved the line. Right? So I had to find now somebody who could initiate this program in what would then come to be called, as an umbrella term, Africana philosophy. Right? I had no idea. I had no intentions of doing it. As I said, I was quite happy doing my sociology and talking about economic development in the Caribbean. And so the person who caught my eye and I thought would be the perfect, scholar to do this was Lewis Gordon. Right? Now, the first time I actually met Lewis, he was still a graduate student at Yale. But he was organizing so many panels at the American Philosophical Association that people kept telling me about him, right? The philosophers at Brown, there's this Jamaican guy, he's always organizing so many panels. So I said, let's bring him to Brown. And so we brought him to Brown, right? And let me say this, in this series of speakers, everybody else was either an assistant, associate, or full professor. Lewis was the only graduate student. Okay? What did I tell you about that energy? This was the first sign that I saw of it, right? So anyway, Lewis came, gave a talk on Fanon, right? And that was it for me, right? I was a committed Lewisian right after hearing the talk on Fanon. We became fast friends, and to make a long story short, 2 years later, I stole him away from Purdue University and brought him to Brown. Now, I don't have time to go into this. Getting him to Brown was not as easy as you might think it would have been. The philosophy department did not. Now, the thing is, I had this line. It was given to me by the president of Brown University. I went to the philosophy department and said, look, I will share this line with you. It wasn't costing them anything. Right? It wasn't costing them anything. And yet still they refused, because for them, African philosophy, Afro-Caribbean, African-American philosophy was non-existent. Huh? So Lewis came to Brown, but he came to Brown in religious studies and Africana studies. Well, I was so upset. Right? I had to be a part of this fight. You know, I was telling Chris a funny joke. You know, when I get angry politically, I always grow an afro. So the first thing I decided, I'm not going to regrow my afro. But right at the time that I attempted to grow this afro, I started to go bald. No afro. So I had to do something else. And that something else was I joined Lewis, Cornell West, and all of these struggling, Kwame Gyekye, all of the struggling Afrikaner philosophers, you know, and that's really the story why I'm here. You know, I was just so upset that I could not get Lewis into the Brown philosophy department. But in any event, I don't think I could have picked a better person, right, to help to launch the field of Afrikaner philosophy at Brown. We did it, and from there we have moved out. We formed the Caribbean Philosophical Association, and I am just so thrilled that Lewis's work is so well known here, and that you are all here this afternoon to hear him speak. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend.
Well, first things first, I don't speak with my shoes on. Wow. So we got that out of the way. The second thing is, since we're on this island,
yes, it is.
I guess I might as well use the local vernacular and say good afternoon. You know, we'll go like these natives in England. But then I'll add to it to Jambo.
Jambo.
And Shalom.
Shalom.
Shalom. Salam alaikum.
Salam.
Namaste.
Namaste. And for the yard people, I hope you're keeping well enough. Diary. So first, thanks Gabby, thanks Paget, thanks Chris, and thank you for your gracious hospitality and introduction. The additional thing I'd like to say is thank you also, Gabby, in your introduction of mentioning Lehman College. I always try to make sure, in fact, sometimes, you know, a lot of people don't care where I got my degree. And so I don't do one of these, you know, I got my degree stuff. However, I like to bring up Lehman College because it's like Woolwich. And some of you from the previous discussion heard me say that it's very important to value the communities who value you. And it really disturbs me that many people, for instance, who may come from humble beginnings, when they get to lofty heights, if we talk about Sankofa, they forget where they come from. So it's very important for me to make sure Because for me, Lehman College was not simply the place I started, because I didn't plan to go to college. As a musician, doing my thing, it's a long story. And even when I went to college, for me, it was more about the education than the degree. So I went through very quickly because I was learning quite a bit, and the rest, as we say, is history. But for me, it's a symbolic place. You see, because we live in a world of systems that try to tell you there are places you don't belong, and to tell you the places from which you start, you should be ashamed. And I think it's very important for all of us to be proud of the places that set the conditions for us to stand up and perhaps sometimes even fly. Okay? So for me, Lehman is Woolwich. So I'm glad you did that. The second thing related to that is, you know, the story Pat had told does have another element which he didn't know, because I really mean what I say when I say you should respect those who respect you. So he found out very recently that when I was there, that department started to try to do a little kiss up to see if I would join them, and I said no, because I don't want to degrade myself with those whose behavior, as far as I'm concerned, make them beneath me. Now I say this to you because I say you should respect those who respect you. And in the course of my career, there have been what they call prestigious places that have invited me to join them. And the look on their face when I say no. Because there's a presumption that all we want is the recognition of those who dominate us. But they didn't get it. See, I didn't go to Brown University because it was an Ivy League university. I didn't go there for recognition as other things. I went there to work with my colleague Paget Henry for us to build something together, because we didn't know if we'll succeed, but we knew that the future, some future, we didn't know exactly which kind, depended on our actions. So even when I was there, when another very prestigious Ivy League university, the philosophy department, interestingly enough at that time, ranked the #1 philosophy department in the world, invited me to give a talk, I went there because they had African studies there. And then I realized these people were trying to recruit me. And they were selling the place, you know. And the look on their face when I said, I'm not on the market. They were like, what do you mean you're not on the market? It's connected to the question with capitalism earlier. There's a presumption that everybody at your heart has a capitalist consciousness. But that's not true. And this is connected to one of the themes of this meeting. Because, you know, it says philosophy, faith, and social justice. And if we're going to talk about those themes, we need to talk about them in a way that challenges the way we think we ought to have historically talked about them. Okay? So one thing I'm going to do, because we have limited time, is I'm going to outline some issues. And that way I could elaborate through the question and answer. Okay? Because I'm one of those people who really believe in audience participation. And I can talk a long time. How long? I, for instance, have given 30 hours of lectures in 3 days in places. Okay? So maybe that anchor point is right. But I want to start off first then by just saying a little thing about just a few things. I'm just going to say them and we build from there. The first thing to understand is that the historical way in which you have received your understanding of philosophy is false. And one of the things that's very difficult for a lot of people to understand is that the reason that falsehood has been able to be very dominant is because that falsehood has achieved a level of mythic hegemony. Okay? And in this talk, when I say the mythic, I don't simply mean the false, because sometimes false and truth have nothing to do with myth. What a myth is that which organizes meaning in your life. So once something is mythic, there's no way you can give proof or evidence against it. You see what I'm saying? A good example, for instance, of a myth that has come to dominate your lives has been the myth, right, in the global south of structural adjustment and neoliberal capitalism, right? Because if you look at all of history, can you name one instance of the economic policies that are imposed in the rest, all of us in this room and the rest of the world, can you name one instance of it ever working?
No.
There is not one. But here's the point. The point is because it is a myth, which means it has no principle of verification. You see what I'm getting at? If you go back to looking at the scholastics, for instance, in the Middle Ages, they were able to build a whole system around something even though there was no evidence of it being there. You see? So the first thing to understand, if we're going to talk about philosophy, is that philosophy also has a myth, which is the myth that it has no relationship to myth. You all know what I'm talking about. You'll always meet, for instance, a pompous philosopher, usually one who pretends that it's usually he, smokes a pipe, or has to rub his chin. And say, well, I'm going to relieve you of your myth through philosophy. Of course, it's a tricky thing if you're going to admit myth. Because if you talk about myth, you're talking about what is meaningful to you. So the way Padgett talked about the Inca signs, for instance, was not simply the question of their logic. He wanted you to understand its meaning. Okay? And this question of meaning is crucial because, for instance, meaning can rewrite the past. So, for instance, you always hear that philosophy began with the Greeks. But when I teach philosophy, and you could see even from the handout Padgett gave, you know, that list of thinkers on the African continent before you even get to the Christian period, that list were people who taught 2,000 years before you had the first what is called Greek philosopher. Okay? So a very basic point is if you're going to hear that philosophy began with the Greeks, you're going to say, well, how come these people were around? These are the people who preceded them. Not only that, there are things some of you don't know, because, for instance, the response that's often given is that philosophy is a Greek word. Philosophia. I studied Greek as well, right? Philosophia. The problem is the philia, the fraternal type love, and the Sophia is not a Greek word. In fact, it's a word that's a transformation of a pre-Coptic word in Northeast Africa, which is Sabea. Okay? And there are many of these words that go back to the past that, if you understand them, could make you see that there was a more complicated way of dealing with the world that connects to our organizing schemes. Okay? So that's the short. There's a longer version of that. Now, within that very ancient way of dealing with those words, there are lots of other words that you could deal with. But within that framework, there were many periods of innovations in terms of how we are able to look at faith, which is linked also to myth, but also the way we're able to look at what we could call the spiritual. The reason I say this is because everyone in this room now is dominated by a world in which when you say the spiritual faith, you immediately go to religion. The problem is, many of you don't know, is that humanity did not historically work with religion. Religion is something historically specific. And a lot of the discussions we have about religion, those discussions were mediated by a particular way of organizing the gods and, yes, taxes. And that was because in the Roman world, you can have, as long as you pay attention to your gods and you pay your taxes, relegere, it can be relegated. you can be bound to the state. So religion is something that comes through a very specific period in history. Okay, that's the first thing. So you have to ask yourself, well, what was before religion? Well, before religion, the way people thought was in a way that didn't require that relegation, but they saw themselves as connected to a larger scheme of things in life. You see what I mean? So in effect, and again I have to make it short, but the problem is, as religion became the category, people imposed religion on a lot of people across the world. I mean, is it correct to call Yoruba religion? Today people impose it on it, or we talk about a Khan, or if we talk about even Hinduism. You know, there's a way that you squeeze it into a religion box when it's greater than that. So once we begin to realize that greater than, the first problem we have is that we need to release ourselves from ways of thinking of the world that squeeze us into a box, that make us fail to see what's around us. You know, in other words, a lot of what I'm talking about would be like if you were to be able to be convinced that this entire room is really the seat of this chair. If you get convinced of that, you could sit in a chair and say, my, what a big chair I'm sitting on. When everybody else, there's a whole world around you. So the first thing is to understand is that there's a way in which you can be made to have reality hidden from you in plain sight. And this was an insight that is pre that Roman period. So for instance, Akhenaten was on the list, Imhotep and others. Akhenaten understood, for instance, that, and this is connected to the way Paget also talked about the situation. When you talk about a Khan, but you could see it in a lot of other contexts. What Akhenaten understood is that if you look at the sun gives you rays of light and it affects life on the planet. But Akhenaten said, the sun is only the image brought to you. The real question is what is behind the sun. You see what I'm getting at? And this insight is what affected a lot of what is called monotheism. So one of the other falsehoods you often get is not only that philosophy began among the Athenians and the Macedonians and those people, but also the myth that monotheism is something brought into Africa. Right? It was, those ideas were in Africa way before. Wow, for a second when I said way before, it sounded like Mutabaruka, didn't I? Way before, anyway. But here's the thing. My point is not to defend monotheism. You see what I'm trying to get at? Because even that's a very tricky issue. Okay? My point is something different. So I'm going to go through them seriatim and see if they're useful to you. Okay? So the first thing that you need to bear in mind is there's a difference between religion, myth. Many religions incorporate myth, philosophy, and all those themes. But within all those themes, there is also the question of a very specific history to understand that we commit one among many important fallacies when we think about these issues. And one of the fallacies is we want to get rid of everything to find out a single thing that's the answer to everything. You got it? So I want to start with 3 myths, right, that tend to dominate a lot of the issues we're dealing with. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other concepts and we'll build from there. So the first myth, which is in the title of my talk, is what we call the Theodicean myth. And the Theodicean myth, I'm going to explain, but the short version of it is that it affects lots of thinking, including our sense of social justice, our sense of philosophy. And the Theodicean myth is basically the idea that you can find yourself to the all conclusion, to you can eliminate an outside. You can construct things in such a way that you have the answer to everything in such a way that there's nothing else. You got it? And I'm going to explain that in a minute. The second myth, which is something that dominates even some of the discussions I've had, first myth, is that somewhere out there in the world, there is a set of people who got everything right. It's the myth of perfect people. You got it? Because the view is, and if you think about it, it's very logical. If you can just find the perfect people, then you just have to ask them the answers. And they just tell you everything and things are set. Now, there's a third one, and that one I'm not going to talk much about, but it's related in a way. The third one is what I call the Great Gathering. And that one is very potent for religions, okay? The Great Gathering is this belief that if you could get a sufficient crowd, you can solve everything, okay? And so that's the myth of the unanimity. And it's at the heart of when people say, you know, we could just all get along, agree, all become one, we will solve all our problems, okay? Now, each of these has a problem with it. The easy problem with the last one is that it leads to what I call authenticity myths. Now again, remember when I say myth, I don't mean a myth must be wrong. There are good myths, okay? Good in the sense that they give your life meaning and they enable you to grow, okay? So when I'm saying this, I'm not meaning it to be disparaging. But that said, I want to leap over now to some of the issues at hand and how they connect to what I want to talk about. The first one, of course, is that we wouldn't be talking, the question of social justice wouldn't have even come in to the equation here if we weren't living in a world of profound injustice. So to make it very simple, a lot has gone wrong, okay? And a lot that we're talking about that's gone wrong has gone wrong in a very specific way. And that specific way connects to the kind of people we're talking about in a meeting like this one. And those kind of people, the short version of it, are people who have had an historical, political, and very violent imposition on them that comes down to a simple thesis. The thesis is that those people aren't really people. You got it? Now, once you understand that, you know that's the condition. It's not only of people of African descent, but as Paget said, historically there was no reason for people of African descent to have called ourselves black. You got it? It's those historical circumstances that imposed the category black on us. Now, here's where it's tricky. Because you see, some people say, what if it was imposed on me? I need to get rid of it. I want to stop being black, man.
Yeah, man.
Right? But here is the problem. The first problem with that one is that, you see, if you take that position, you're in an ironic relationship to the question of blackness. Because in effect, that position is to assert the view that the world would somehow be better without black people. Really think about that. This is the ironic situation of black people. That we live in a world that produced us as black, so which makes us indigenous to it. But that world simultaneously, when it produced us as black, asserted that we don't belong in it. Talking about a neurotic situation. That's like saying, you know what? Come over here to your home as long as you stay outside. That is the situation. Now, of course, the problem you face now is a problem that, as many people in the African diasporic philosophical tradition have pointed out, you face the problem of being a problem. And that problem of being a problem leads to three three fundamental ways in which we struggle with these issues. The first one I've already just begun to talk about. In a nutshell, the question it raises is, what am I? What are we? And that is connected to another question, what does it mean to be human? You got it? But there's a second one that comes out of that. It's a pretty obvious one. The story I just told is a story connected to colonialism, enslavement, and racism. And all three are connected to the view that not only say you don't deserve to exist, but in saying you don't deserve to exist, saying you are not worthy of freedom. So the issue that comes about for us, fundamentally, is the meaning of freedom. But then there's a third. And in a way, we get together in meetings like these because of that third. The third is that we know very well that a lot of reasoning, a lot of rationality, a lot of thinking has been devoted to making us believe that we're not human and we don't deserve to be free. And you could see the problem with that, right? The problem with that is that it leads to a profound questioning of the resources of reason and rationality. If you look at almost the history of black thought, all the way through, if you look at, for instance, Kugana, who wrote in London in the 18th century, it's reasoning all over the place, but the problem is there's a world that says that if you are white, you're intrinsically rational. And if you're not white, you're intrinsically not rational. Well, irrational is one thing, but also not rational, okay? So you need to deal with the question of how reason works. Now, I'm not going to talk about that one. I'm going to talk about the first two, because the question of freedom is linked to the question of social justice. Okay? And as I talk about these, I'm going to talk about them in ways that will connect to some of the issues that some of you have been looking into. So the first one I'm going to look at, because it's of interest to many of you, is how we deal with the what am I question in terms of how we're conscious of it. Many of you have heard it as double consciousness, black consciousness, these issues. Now the problem with double consciousness, in a nutshell, the problem is when you are black, you have to deal with a double conscious reality. Every black person knows a white person's point of view. How do you know? Because from the day you're born till the day you die, white points of view are thrown at you left and right. And you know that white point of view says that you are black. You got it? So that means you live being black and are conscious of how a non-black sees you as black. The problem, of course, is the non-black is located in the world that governs how you're seen as black. So that world is treated as normal. And if you accept the normality of that world, there's only one conclusion. Something is wrong with you. Now, if you accept that, then your faith is very straightforward. You, in effect, to be normal, become a black-hating black person. Right? That's treated as the norm. How do we know this? Because there's a presumption that if you're black, your life must be like this. The alarm bell rings, you get up in the morning to brush your teeth. You go and you look in the mirror and you say, oh God, I'm still black. So you know what that means. Now you gotta walk out your house and do black things. So you do your black walk, which is accompanied by, of course, a sorrowful blues. And then you go and have black relations, which consists of ongoing degradation and violence. And all the pathologies of the society are invested in you being black. Of course, there's a problem with that. Because many of you know, especially when you're among other black people, there are times you know what you're thinking about. You're thinking about your favorite football team. You're thinking about, hey, the lunch was pretty good, wasn't it? You know, if you went to an Oxford function and had those awful cucumber sandwiches, whiteness don't look so good then, does it? You think about all of the ways, you think of the people you love. There's another way of thinking about black that's very life-affirming. In fact, how life-affirming, when I'm in South Africa, I know a whole bunch of black bush people who can't wait till Friday because they go to the townships so they could have a good time. You see what I'm getting at? So the thing that you know at a basic level they try to make you forget, is that the only way black people could be here today, as C.L.R. James, Fanon, Du Bois, Anna Julia Cooper, Claudia Jones, all these people talk about. The only way there could be black people in this room today is if, despite the effort to whip us, chain us, degrade us, spit on us, kick us, chop us up, we didn't only fight back, but the way we fought back was through self-respect.
Wow.
Good.
You see what I'm getting at?
Good.
So the moment you recognize that despite that blackness created, our reassertion of our humanity, our self-respect, it means that we represent a paradox, which is the ability to assert the value of life and dignity in the face of adversity. You see? And that is very powerful. You see? Because at that moment, your blackness, although you face adversity, is a source of strength. Now you begin to walk and you think about that blues when you walked out the house. Now you rethink that blues. Because you see, the blues is rather interesting. The blues, everybody knows that it's one of the most distinct statements on humanity in what's called the modern world. The blues is taking many forms: jazz, ska, reggae, hip-hop, bossa nova. It has taken all kinds of forms. Right now in Beijing, there's somebody sitting down, born and bred Chinese, listening to the blues. You see? When people decide they want to shake their hips and call it rock and roll on this island, the whitest of the white turn to the blues. And that's because, you see, the blues is rather interesting. Because you see, the blues, if you look at it carefully, and it's connected to what Paget said about subexistence, the blues is about maturation. The blues don't hide reality. It puts reality in your face, but in the blues, you say, I'm going to take responsibility for reality. You see how powerful that is? It means you're an agent. And if you're an agent, it means there's something you can do. So the first thing you discover, and this is what W.B. Du Bois and Richard Wright, Fanon, all these discover, is that, well, there is an imposed double consciousness that says to be black is whack. There's a critical position on that double consciousness. Paget Henry calls it potentiated double consciousness. There are other names for it, where you now dialectically give a critique of a world that says you're inferior. What kind of world is going to make the very foundations, the very history of humanity inferior? And the answer is a society that has problems. So in effect, the problem becomes not you, but a society that makes you into problems. That's a potentiated double consciousness. To give you an example of what I mean, in the United States they have Martin Luther King Day. And when my eldest child was 4 years old, they have the children off for Martin Luther King Day, so I thought if he's off for Martin Luther King Day, let me talk about Martin Luther King. So I started telling him about Martin Luther King. I talked about his education, this, that. And at a certain point in the story, I get to when he was put in jail. And you have to picture from a 4-year-old's point of view. My son, my eldest son, looked and he said, "Wait, Dad." And tears were welling in his eyes. And here's what he said. "I thought you said Martin Luther King was a good man." And I said, "He was." And then he said, "Then how could he have been put in jail?"
Injustice.
The only way to explain that is there's something wrong with a society that puts a good person in jail.
Thank you.
You see? At that moment, it puts into my son a critical consciousness. You see what I'm getting at? And a lot of what we call Africana philosophy and black philosophical thought is that moment. You know that third one I said? To have a critique of the justificatory practices, the question of reason. It's when it facilitates your saying, what are those conditions that would do this to people? And that movement is when you talk about the problem of being made into a problem. Okay? And that has generated quite a bit. Because from there now, you begin to ask yourself another kind of critical question. For instance, when I speak, I always distinguish between the Euro-modern world and the modern world. You see, a lot of people don't realize, the way I talked about the fact that that world made you think philosophy must be Euro? It's the same kind of world that makes you think modern must be Euro. The truth is, a lot of people, when they talk about modern, if you think about it, every time you think modern, you think about something European. Now, what we don't realize is that even Europe wasn't historically Europe. Europe was created. There used to be Christendom. And in fact, what created Christendom was linked into certain other things. That came out of the way I talked about religion. It came out of a particular view of the Roman Empire, of the Roman Empire, how it related to ancient Judea on the northern side of the Mediterranean. Because you see, on the southern side of the Mediterranean, in the African areas, a lot of you may not even know this, all the action that was the intellectual foundation, the theological foundation of the way you understand rabbinic Judaism. There are different kinds of Judaism, but rabbinic Judaism and Christianity, the action, the debates were taking place in Africa. For instance, have you heard of Oregon?
Yeah.
Tertullian?
Yes.
Good. Oh, that's right. You all teach theology here. Way to go, my sister. And of course, St. Augustine, even with St. Augustine, what many of you always hear about, he's Roman. Both of his parents were African. And there are all kinds of things, as this history is rewritten, that many of you don't know. But maybe, I don't want to be presumptuous, many of you do know. But the main point here is that transformation, you see, you have to understand that in every period in history, certain historical circumstances will convince a group of people through their capacity to dominate other groups of people that they are the conclusion of what humanity will be. And this is what creates the modern, that people don't understand. There have been many moderns because there were many periods in history that groups of people emerged in which they believed they were the last empire. Rome was supposed to be the eternal city, right? And we know what Britain was supposed to be. Or maybe it still think it is. But you know what the United States also does? You see a lot of strange behavior in the United States because for a typical American, even the term American that they've claimed over the whole era, the presumption is that if the United States is not dominating the world, what does that mean? And this is myth. What does that mean? And you know what it means? The end of the world. Do you see what I'm getting at? Yes. Now you could imagine, Portugal once believed that. Spain once believed that. Holland once believed that. We could go down the list. But the caliphates once believed that. With some still trying to rebuild the caliphate, that's another matter. But you keep going, the Persians once believed that. All these people once believed that if they don't control the world, it's the end of the world. You see what I'm getting at?
Yes.
And so, what at the same time the debates from the people dominated is that the people don't get passively dominated. In those periods, the people remember, they once lived in a view that when they got up in the morning, they believed the future is a future with them in it. So they didn't have any reason until they were conquered to believe the world ended. But now they have a debate. How do they coordinate the way they believe the world was with the way the world has become? And that struggle is what challenges empires, but it's also a site of creativity. So, I'm going to move quickly to why I said theodicy. Now, since many of you have the theological background, I don't have to go through the details of what theodicy is. Just for those who are not familiar, the short version is, if God is all powerful and God is all good, how do you explain the existence of infelicity, injustice, evil? You know? And the classic responses come from St. Augustine and others. But you could just remember, some of you maybe when you were a child had an argument with your parent about it, and you had a Theodicean moment. What is a Theodicean moment? Say to your mother or your father, there can't be a God. And they said, what you talking about? You say, look at all this evil in the world. If God is good, God will do something about it. And the two classic responses are, the first one, of course, who the hell are you to question what God does? You know, that in a nutshell is, right? It's sort of, right? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? But then there's a second response. If your parent don't decide to, as we say, box you, there's another response, which is, you know, God, in God's love and devotion for you, made you with a free will. And a whole bunch of human beings screwed it up. You got it? Now, if you look at both versions, God remains intact. So the problem becomes humanity. Okay? Now, that is structurally similar to that problem of being a problem. You see what I'm getting at? Because now here's where the danger comes in. What if you took God out the picture, but you kept those arguments? And this is where certain religious traditions are very insightful. You know? Judaism, for instance, you're not supposed to have an image of God. It's idolatrous. Something is not supposed to be God, a thing. You see? And I heard earlier, for instance, some people don't get this, but I'll also bring up an extra point, because it's related to what we're talking about. In Judaism, when you say the imago Dei, the image of God, it does not mean a physical image like, so people think we look like God. No, that would be a sin. In Judaism, what you are is responsible for the image of God. So God is an ethical relationship. You see what I'm getting at? It's not an ontological concept in the way you talk about this chair. It becomes even more radical, because it means if someone showed you there is an argument that there is no God, the question for you there is not about the location of God. It's about the commitment. You see what I'm getting at? And that commitment is a relationship with other human beings. That is an ethical relationship. Because the argument is, if God exists, God should be the expression of justice and good. You see what I'm getting at? Now, the reason this is important is, what if a state or a particular knowledge system or a particular, race came in and said that it or they have the qualities of God? You see? Then in effect, then, you are going to have to relate to them like theodicy. In effect, you have to say the political system, the state, the cultural system, or the race of people are intrinsically perfect and good. That's why the second one, perfect people. Which means if you question them, something is wrong with you. Now, isn't that what a lot of you face in England? And if you look across the world, the discussion, you see double standards everywhere. In fact, what you see is a world in which all kinds of statements are made about the importance of humanity and freedom and so forth, as long as it is not black. And you could add to that indigenous or whatever group is going to be designated outside. And there's a longer story to tell, because you see, the historical part was a category of supposedly non-humans called women. But the emergence of colonialism and racism created a problem, because if colonized people are supposed to be non-human, are you going to say all the colonized people are women? Do you see the problem? So it needed to realign itself, and it created a new category of non-human people called racialized people. And it began to create the idea that you can have double standards of humanity. So the question about what is to be human becomes Theodicean, precisely because, you see, now it has a problem. Because you see, that image of how to deal with the question of God means that at the heart of making the system God-like is that it's idolatrous. At the heart of it is to make the dominating group into gods. And so what happens in effect is that they lose accountability. So now we have a very complicated issue. If you're going to reintroduce accountability, the only way you can do it is not only to affirm your humanity, but you need to humanize those idiots who have structured themselves as gods. Now, I use the word idiots on purpose, because a lot of people don't know this. The word idiot properly is a political category. Yeah, an idiot properly is a non-political animal. And you live in a world, if you notice, and you all know this, there is a profound fear of locating le damné de la terre, the damned of the earth. A lot of people translate it as the wretched of the earth, but it's really the damned of the earth. Okay? The presupposition is that the damned of the earth must stay away from politics. Now really think about that. You all know, for instance, how people freak out when black folks get political. All right? If you look at even very recent times, if you look at the butchery done to the memory of Martin Luther King, if you look at the way Martin Luther King has been sold to people was as a moral figure, not a political one. The man was political throughout, but he was rewritten in history as moral to make it palatable. Thank God, you can't do that to Malcolm X.
No, sir.
Even though, right? He was Islam doing his thing. And one of the reasons you can't is because, you see, political beings, to be political, you need to have certain things that challenge the contours of how you think about stuff like justice. The first thing you have to understand about being political is that you can't be political without a relationship to power. Actually, when you said black and power. Okay? The next thing is you cannot be political without a relationship to speech. Because you see, if you're political, you're negotiating power. Which means if you're in a position to negotiate power, you have to be located differently to the institutions of power. Which leads to the third point. Fanon, when he looked at racism, said that a lot of people got it wrong when they tried to look at what an anti-racist struggle is. Many people say the struggle against racism is a struggle against otherness. Fanon said no. No. Because you see, in a world of self and others, at least the other is another human being. Racism is to say there are categories of people who are not really human beings. So racism locates groups of people outside of the self and the other. It's a theodicy. You see? And if you're outside of the self and other, but ethics is in the self-other relationship, then when you, in effect, attempt to enter that relationship, when you, in effect, make yourself appear in a system that says it's legitimate if you don't appear, you, in effect, violate that system. So, in effect, you know what you suffer under racism? The crime of illicit appearance. Racism says the world is best if you're not in it and if you're not seen. You see the problem that poses for politics. How are you going to do politics without appearing? In fact, it gives you an insight into a lot of this stuff happening with police violence across the world, because you notice they say the word police brutality. You notice they never say violence. You know why?
Why?
Because the force is presumed legitimate because they're representatives of the institutions of power. This is why we tend to lose. If the presumption is that force was legitimate, then the real debate is not about force, it's about how much. But here's the problem. If what is illegitimate is your appearance, then that means you literally appearing is the violation of a crime, which means the appearance of any black person is legitimation of force.
Wow. Wow.
How are you going to fight that? You'd have to change the system that makes your appearance illicit. So what Fanon said is that if you attempt to set as the condition of your appearance the legitimacy in terms of the ethics of that system, you're going to lose, because that system had already presumed justice was your absence. Do you see what I'm getting at? So that means every time you are the only way you can convince them that you're doing something right is to not do anything. So the first point then is, if you want to have a social change, a lot of those issues about ethics become paradoxical, because it means you have to prioritize the political action to change the playing field in order to have an ethical relationship. Do you see what I'm getting at? And this is where it becomes very, 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 very crucial. Because if we get to the question of power, now we have to ask, what is power? Because you see, if you look at the way a lot of people argue ethical issues, issues of justice, they argue about them as if it's a matter of just you're being able to understand. Somehow you just don't seem to get it right what the moral things are to do. Now, you tell me. Look at the past 500 years. Not even that, just even look at the past 20 years. The people who dominate all the institutions of power have been well educated in moral argumentation. They know all of the ethical issues. You think those people at the World Bank don't know? Amartya Sen, who writes on justice, has an audience with them all the time. All of those who graduated from Harvard studied at one point with John Rawls. Thomas Pogge, who is not doing well in the news these days, taught all of those people from Columbia and Yale and those places. So really, really think about it. All those people are well schooled in theories of social justice who go there and make decisions that would increase profit by 1% that could lead to the death of another 40,000 people. Many of those people who did those hedge funds and stuff that led to people losing their pensions, their retirements, whole municipalities falling apart, were well schooled in theories of justice. So that should tell you something, because it's something you all know as very well too. When you think about racism, people would like to believe that it's the frotting Klansman is the image. But what every one of you know is that what maintains a racist system is, for the most part, a set of very decent people. Right? Somewhere, someone who really hates black people, who hate South Asians, who hate Native Americans, who somewhere there are people, or if you put it at a level, there are a lot of people who are misogynists who hate women, would go to men's tea club and say, would you like a cup of tea? They're very polite, they're very good. They give to charities. So already it means if you're dealing with these issues, you have to deal with the problem of a different kind. And here, the short version for me to close out is something to consider. The first thing to consider is that what power is very simple. Power is the ability to make things happen. That's what power is. Power is the ability to make things happen mixed with access to the conditions. You see? Now, if you think about it in theological terms, the great exemplar of power was God. Why? Well, I can give you a good example. What if I were to say, okay, I'm going to take a break in my talk because I have a special guest. God. So I invite her in. And she comes in. In many places, God doesn't have a sex, but given the context of injustice, we're making God she. She comes in, and let's not be stereotypical. Let's just mix it up a little. Let's give her Barry White's voice. Okay? So she comes in, and you're all going to look, and you're going to say, "You're God?" And she says, "Yes." And then you all think, "You're really God?" And she says, "Damn straight." What's the first thing that, if you had a chance to raise your hand, the first thing you're going to ask her?
Where you got a man's voice?
Well, then she says, "Well, I could choose Michael Jackson." I'll leave it for you to figure out. But no, the first thing you're all going to say if God is here, you know what you're going to say. You're going to say, "You God?" Yeah. You're going to say, "Do something." God makes no sense without miracles. Power, God has to do something. So if you say, "Do something," if God said, "Nah," you're going to say, "Why?" Now here's the thing. If God says, "I don't want to," that's one thing.
Wow.
But if God says, "I can't,"
Wow.
you're going to say, "What kind of God are you?" In the islands they say, "Go ahead." Right? But so you see what I'm getting at?
Yeah. Wow.
So keep your eye on the ability to make things happen. Now, if you put God to the side, if you say, "We don't believe you anymore," so God says, "My offsprings don't believe with me, I need an analyst," and goes to resurrects Freud and anyway. Now, if you look at, but Freud had a very interesting insight. He argued that human beings created a prosthetic God. The prosthetic God, he said, was culture. Wow. Culture produces meanings. In culture with language, etc., we are able to deal with some of the things that we needed God to do. And here's what I mean. Let's start just with me. If we look at me, right? If I deal purely with my physicality, if I want anything done, I have to do it. If I want to drink some water, I have to pick this bottle up and drink it. If I want to get over there, I have to walk. Okay? But then human beings created this thing called language. So now I could stay here, and I don't have to walk over to the back of the room to connect with you who are there. And in fact, because this is being filmed, it means there will be people I will connect with whom I would never meet. And if what I'm saying has an impact on their lives, they could connect to people. And if somebody 3,000 years from now, give it, preferably if it's archived in a way that it doesn't have to deal with degenerating from electromagnetic radiation reduced, somebody 3,000 years from now could be connected to what we're doing in this room now. So the ability to make things happen with culture enables us to go beyond our bodies. And if you think about the opposite of it, if we want to reduce the ability to make things happen, we can not have the camera. We can make it that a law that says whenever Lewis Gordon speaks, cover your ears. So all you'll see is, you see what I'm getting at? Now at that point, if I want to affect you, the only way I can do it is to go and physically shake you or touch you. See what I'm getting at? So now my power and force become one. If you think about the way oppression works, the way racism works, it's to get a group of people and limit their capacity to have an impact on the world. It reduces their reach till eventually it's only their bodies. One of the things we know, for instance, is that when you know oppression exists, when any group of people, whatever their background may be, whether they're, interesting enough, a lot of people don't know, Caucasians are actually people of color. Yes. A lot of people don't know that. If you go to Russia, they're in the category of black people.
Yeah.
If you're Ainu in Japan, we could go down the list. If you're a Dali, depending on what you are, as you go through the list, and in this country we already know the category black, how it functions, we keep going. What the project of oppression is to force you to have agency only over your effort to fix your body. Sometimes not even over your body, as in the case of slavery, when somebody else owns your body. You see? So when oppression exists, you are compelled to devote your agency to fixing yourself. So that's why a lot of this language people have about, if we could just fix ourselves, are off the mark. That's completely compatible with the maintenance of oppression. To change oppression, you need to change the conditions of power. Which means, and Fanon talked about this, it means you have to affect the options available through which, in the choices you make, those choices are meaningful. So in effect, the struggle against oppression requires the expansion of power. But when I said power here, you notice the way I use power? Power is a function of a social world. Now if we get back to the God example, the prosthetic gods take the form of institutions whose task it is to facilitate our ability to make things happen. Those institutions, among them, is an institution we often call government. If you think about when government is healthy, what do you want from government? Well, the same things you want from God. God is supposed to protect you. God is supposed to create the conditions for your health. That's why you want health care. God is also supposed to make sure you have clean water and all that stuff. But God is also supposed to help you with a real profound source of misery in your life. And you know what that is? Other people. God is supposed to help you against those moments in which, although other people are a source of inspiration and love, now and then you meet somebody is, as we say in Jamaica, bad-minded enough. You know what I mean? So you need to have, so if you think about it, when you think about, for instance, in the Bible, God offers laws. And a lot of the rules, rituals of religions, or any theistic system, is to give you laws to help you live a better life. Okay? When it's unhealthy, however, those laws are not designed to facilitate your ability to make things happen. They're designed to reduce your capacity as an agent. You see? And that's where it becomes interesting, because you see, what enables institutions to exist is that we have invested in them the ability to make more happen by doing things that connect to their rules and regulations. However, if they lose the legitimacy, the only way they could get us to do things is through the use of force. So the more you see, as the police as an example, the use of what's called police force, it's precisely because there must be a crisis. Not simply, it's not only racism, it's a crisis at the very system of legitimation. You see, it means that in relation to the people being abused, that institution is not actually functioning as a flourishing institution. So this, to conclude then, brings us to the question of how we deal with social justice. Because if you're going to struggle for social justice, the error people make is that they collapse it into moralism. When they collapse it into moralism, it's about if you could just see things a certain way. But the problem with that is then it doesn't address the deeper issue. It deals with, they have to rely on guilt and other mechanisms, when in fact the problem, the real problem, if you look back to when I talk about the problem of making people into problems, is the problem of an unhealthy social system. An unhealthy society is a society that sets as its condition of well-functioning the production of poverty, unemployment, all those things. So once one begins to address those issues, now you begin to get into another issue, because you see, the problem we have is this. Even if you were, and this is where, even if the danger is to treat justice now as a theodicy. If you treat justice in and of itself as dealing with the issue, then you will have no resource to deal with the question of action when justice in and of itself is not enough. If you look at the world we live in today, there have been many efforts to articulate justice as long as the justice, the conception of justice, could maintain the system. But if the problem is the game itself, I put it this way. When I was in South Africa and many other places, I met many people who try to fix people. You all know this. Many of you are political activists, you go to meetings. Sometimes you can't get anything done because people are worried about if each member of the group is good enough. You know what I mean? They talk about your position on this, your position, and they go all about it, right? But you see, and eventually the question is a kind of moralism. But here's the problem. The problem in the world today is not that there are immoral people in it. The problem is that the location of people who are immoral is that they're on top of us. That's the problem. If we could shift the system to make the people who are on top of us, next to us, well, think about it. Now you have room, and if you don't like them, you go to another side of the room. They become irrelevant. You see what I'm getting at? The problem with the moralism model is it's a Theodicean model that leads to purges. However, if you're in a world in which you have changed the conditions through which power is located with those, right, who in that system are compelled to make decisions a certain way, because in another talk elsewhere I brought up this issue. You know what matters more to people in the world today? It matters more to people in the world today, most people, not whether they're immoral or not. What matters to most people in the world today is whether other people think they're stupid. I could ask all of you this. What would bother you more? I could ask it right now. That people think you're unethical or immoral, or that you're stupid. I'm honestly asking you. And you notice you had to pause.
Yeah.
Now think about if you create a social system in which if you were to make the decisions that would have saved the lives of people, created a better society, that your colleagues are going to say, man, you're stupid, we could have made a lot of profit. Increasingly the decisions will be very different. So the task at hand, the intellectual task, is to bring back the question of the activities through which we have to deal with an existential conundrum. The existential conundrum is that moralism and a lot of models of how we talk about the world are based on the idea that the pure rationalization of that system can compel action. Put differently, many of us want to have the outcome before the performance. The problem we have in the world today is that we need the performance to set the conditions for the outcome. How do we know? Because if I go back to what I began with, this room can be here right now. You all can be here right now because you have had ancestors who had every reason to believe they would have failed in their struggles. But they understood that their struggles were worth waging through a commitment to a love for people they would never, ever meet. That was their task, and it is yours. Thank you.